Please now welcome our second speaker on the topic of Our Convenience at the Cost of Their Innocence, How Economic Globalization Caused Sex Trafficking, Ms. Emma Leathers.
The world's oldest profession has become the world's largest oppression. 27 million people have had their innocence stolen from them. 27 million people have faced rape or abuse each day. 27 million. That is 54,000 times the population of Trinity Classical Academy, and 857,000 times greater than this year's graduating class. This should shock us into action. How can we live in a world where 27 million people are still in slavery? Why does slavery continue to exist? Young people are trafficked, drugged, abused, and raped each day. Children are expected to bring in a certain amount of money per day, otherwise they are beaten and raped by their traffickers. They have come into this life through manipulation or desperation, and they cannot see a way out. Slavery in the U.S. should have ended through the 14th Amendment and through the Emancipation Proclamation. But with the emergence of economic globalization, this ancient evil continues. Although many people would argue that the benefits economic globalization brings outweigh the costs, I argue that economic globalization is the primary cause of sex trafficking because the lack of borders among nations leaves the poor and vulnerable without the protection of the law, and massive inflation, which comes as a disastrous side effect of globalization, wreaks havoc among developing nations' markets, leaving people desperate. Economic globalization, the phenomenon of freer borders and free flow of trade and capital among countries, causes sex trafficking, both the illegal transportation of young girls and their prostitution by means of fraud, coercion, and fear through lack of borders. The lack of borders comes as a dark consequence of free communications because without border control, there's no one to stop traffickers from smuggling their human cargo. Along the Nepal and Indian border, the average age of a trafficking victim is between 10 and 12 years old. Young girls who are physically smaller are more easily trafficked. Open borders, coupled with the technology revolution, allows traffickers to smuggle victims in and out of the country. Because without border control, there is no adequate security. Once displaced, they are regarded as illegal immigrants and are left without the protection of the law and are at the mercy of international law enforcement. Stricter borders would significantly reduce sex trafficking because at least there would be someone to meet traffickers at the border, either a police officer or a barrier. Economic globalization also causes sex trafficking through massive inflation. It has caused a global financial crisis in the Eastern world greater than that of the Great Depression, such as the Asian contagion of 1997 and the Russian financial crisis of 1998. This massive inflation has completely eroded the value of local currencies. Principalities are going bankrupt, leaving people in poverty without means, and the people hit hardest during socio-economic crises are most heavily trafficked, as seen by Venezuela's oil crisis. When Venezuela invested all of their money in oil, after Nicolas Maduro stepped into power of an already unsteady and socialist government, Venezuela's economy crumbled. Because of this, hyperinflation reigned supreme, and traffickers preyed on victims in the streets. Now, Venezuela has a notoriously high inflation rate of 60,000%, and the highest rate of trafficking victims, topping even Thailand. Economic conditions, such as massive inflation, which comes as a direct consequence of globalization, forces people into vulnerability and constrains their decision-making by taking them out of a job, and leaving them with no alternative choice. But, don't the benefits of globalization outweigh the costs? Globalization creates jobs and enables trade in developing countries and achievements good in developed countries. These are good things. Surely, some short-term drawbacks do not negate these benefits. It is true, globalization does have these benefits. However, economic globalization sets the economy of countries into a vicious and brutal cycle of wage and job loss, thus enabling the inevitable downward spiral of the country's economy. The short-term drawbacks become long-term economy collapses, and another child is sold into sex trafficking. There are some who will still say the benefits of globalization outweigh the costs, even if they agree that there's been a rise in trafficking since globalization. To these people, there is one thing to say: the value of human life far outweighs these fleeting benefits. 27 million people are currently enslaved right now. But it doesn't have to remain like this. The effects of globalization do not have to stay. Historically, the church has been a major force in the fight for human rights, taking care of widows and orphans, taking care of the sick and needy, and now crusading against slavery are part of upholding Scripture. This is a call for Christian men to fulfill their God-given roles as protectors of women and children, and a call for Christians everywhere to pray. Sex trafficking can end, starting by targeting economic globalization, with steps as small as supporting local businesses over global businesses, and steps as large as petitioning for the legal age of consent in all of the commercial sex industry to be raised to 21 years old. We can be the generation that ends sex trafficking. It does not have to be our convenience at the cost of their innocence any longer. Thank you.